Thank you for coming to our masterclass, the first of this new calendar here, not academic year. It is my pleasure to welcome Paul Cogan from Betty's and Taylor's, who is representing the big company in the region, right? I think Paul Cogan is going to give us a talk around purpose, values, but also challenges that an organization faces in the process of growth. So Paul is one of the 4 directors of Betty's and Taylor's, and I think it kind of embeds a model of leadership that is unique and hard to find in a way. So I think we have an opportunity to learn about shared leadership, collaborative leadership, and what's the difference between the two, but also understanding what the challenges are in the era of changing audience, changing technological and economic outlook. I think Paul is going to talk a bit more about Betty's and Taylor, so I don't really want to spoil it. We all know what it is. It's beyond having a tea in the city center of York, I guess. And I think the questions will follow afterwards.
Yeah.
So we usually have speakers talking for up to 30-40 minutes. We have an online audience. There should be some students online as well, but very high representation of the staff, so no pressure on you. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm expecting some good questions on that basis. Okay. Morning, everybody. I'm Paul Cogan, a member of the collaborative CEO at Betty's and Taylor's Group, and I've been looking forward to doing this. I did a talk to some businesses, some SMEs in Harrogate, North Yorkshire businesses, just before Christmas, and it was. And it's slightly opposite to this. There were people queuing to get in, and I said to them, "What is it why are you here? What's made it interesting?" And they said, "Well, fundamentally, you never talk about your business. You're very secretive and slightly mysterious." And I said, "Really? Is that how you see us?" They said, "Yeah. Well, when we don't get out there and talk about the stuff we do, so some of this will cover that." So that was the first reason. The second reason was that one of the audience said, "Actually, we're hoping you'd bring some mince pies from Betty." So I learned my lesson. So this time I brought, sadly not for the people online, but I bought some Yorkshire tea. But you have to stay to the end to get a Yorkshire tea. So help yourself on the way out. And it looks like I might be leaving quite a bit for the rest of the university, I think. So today, if I'm pressing in the right direction, I'm not working, Beatrice.
Yeah, just need to move the mouse. Sorry. Now it should work.
Should work. So what I want to talk about today, a bit about our business. And I know people know a little bit, particularly in Yorkshire, around our business, but some of the origins, because it's really important that you get the strand of why we do what we do today. And it starts quite a long time ago. A bit about the business today and where it's at, and the challenges, the positive stuff, the opportunities, and then how we drive through purpose and values, and then leading to what Beatrice mentioned before, which is the collaborative CEO model, which has been suggested is a very different model to run a business. And I'll talk through the challenges and the opportunities that brings. So a little bit just about who we are. I think we've got, if you've been, I know students as well will have been into the centre of York and seen the queues at Betty's. It looks a quiet day there actually on that picture, and Betty's in Café in York. But the big bit of the business is actually the other side of the slide. We do Yorkshire Tea, and as you can see there, we're the #1 in the UK market for tea, and we also have Taylor's of Harrogate coffee. I'll talk a little bit about those in a bit more detail. And maybe for the more adventurous amongst you, the toast and jam brews now, and sadly discontinued because there weren't quite enough adventurous people, but the biscuit brew is going fantastically well. So there's a tip for you. Biscuit brew and caramel biscuit brew, a great product. But it starts by talking about our origins. And this takes us back to our founder, who's that rather austere looking gentleman in the front there. He is Frederick Belmont, and Frederick Belmont was born in 1885 in Switzerland. And we call ourselves a Swiss Yorkshire business. So that's the background. That's why it talks about the Swiss Alps meeting the Yorkshire Dales. And Frederick has a really interesting story. He was born in that mill on the bottom of the picture there, in a place called Wangen in Switzerland, in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And when he was born, he wasn't called Frederick. He was Fritz Butzer, and I'll explain that in a minute. He was born, his father was a baker, and he had 2 sisters, and they lived in that mill. Unfortunately, his mother died in childbirth with his second sister. And the reason I'm telling this story is a big moment in the life of Frederick, which happened and has influenced our business ever since then. So when he was 5, there was a fire at the mill. And his father, he was in the middle of the night, and his father rounded up him and his sisters, got to the front door and realised that one of the sisters hadn't got to the door. So he went back inside to find her. And unfortunately, neither of them ever emerged. So Frederick, our founder, was left an orphan aged 5. He, as was customary in Switzerland at the time, was then taken to where his ancestors came from, further up in the mountains, and he was sold to work on a farm, age 5, sold to a farmer who put him to work in the fields, and then ultimately fed him and clothed him, and he had an education. But it was an incredibly hard lifestyle. And Frederick left as soon as he could when he was 14. And he decided he wanted to be a baker, he wanted to be a chocolatier, he wanted to make patisserie. And so he went to train. And age 16, after some training, he decided that it was better to go somewhere where the streets were paved with gold, which was England. And of course, Bradford. Where else would they be paid with gold more than Bradford? So he came to Bradford and he worked for another business. But ultimately, that experience then got him to set up Betty's. And Betty's was set up in 1919 in Harrogate. And the reason he changed his name at that point was after the First World War, Fritz Butzer didn't get a lot of joy in England. So he became Frederick Valmont. And therefore, he set up this wonderful Parisian style, Venetian style Café tea room. And the whole principle, and this is why I'm telling this story, I'm getting to the point. The whole principle of this was because he wanted people to have something beautiful. He wanted people to have a connection place. He wanted ladies who in 1919 didn't go out on their own to come and feel at home. And he wanted them to love the products that he brought and be delighted as customers. And that's the core that runs through our entire business. So when I talk about purpose and I talk about values, it comes from that experience of Frederick, in my belief. He wanted people to have what he didn't have. Beautiful things, camaraderie, friendship. So that's the story of Betty's and Taylor's. And the rest of the history, the Taylor's bit, 1962, Betty's family bought Taylor's, a tea merchant in Leeds. And little did they know at that point, they bought it because they had some property they wanted. Didn't think about making tea and coffee, really. It was just what they did. And that was the opportunity that then led them to develop Yorkshire Tea. And Yorkshire Tea was created in the 70s and has gone from strength to strength. So that's one of those in your business strategy moments. That's one of those things where an acquisition happened, but for completely different reasons that fundamentally has led us to be the successful business of today. So don't think everything has to be planned. And so I'll just talk about where we are today a little bit to give you a flavour of the business. So this year we will be a 350 million turnover business. We employ around about 1,600 people across the business. It's broadly split into those categories that I talked about. So Yorkshire Tea. When I joined the business nearly 13 years ago, Yorkshire Tea was the 3rd most popular tea in the UK, behind PG Tips and Technic. And we had 12% of the UK market at that point. We're now number 1 with 40% of the UK market. And actually our market share is greater than the other 2 added together now. So it's a real sort of growth and success story built on a quality product and fantastic branding and marketing. We also have the Betty's business, which, as you can see from the picture, is over 100 years old now, started in 1919, had great fun at our centenary. And that is 5 Café tea rooms in Yorkshire, a bakery where we make all our own products, a cookery school, and increasingly online growth. So the engine for growth for Betty's is more online than bricks and mortar now. And then we have the coffee, and coffee is also brand leader in the UK. So it's the biggest brand in UK supermarkets. However, most of UK supermarkets sell own label. That's their main stock coffee sales, if you like. And we've got a foot in that camp. We make all of the coffee for M&S, always have for 30 years. We make coffee for Waitrose and we make some coffee for Asda as well. So we've got good presence there. And the Betty's bit of the business, just because everyone in Yorkshire thinks of Betty's first, it's just over 10% of our business. The rest of it is the big bit, if you like. So that's the background. And in terms of ownership, we are still a privately owned family business. We call ourselves a family business. And that is because the people who own the business are descended from Frederick Belmont. So we're now on our third and fourth generations since Frederick being the first, and they've continued to grow the business. The fifth generation aren't far behind. We have 8 in the fifth generation who are all somewhere between 6 and 18. So that's how the business will develop. So that's the background to where we are. I'm going to move on to talk about our purpose. Now, I realised when I was putting this together that we talk about our purpose, but it doesn't go externally. It's only used internally. Now, that is our choice. And when I say that someone told me we were secretive and mysterious, I think it's because we don't go out with this sort of stuff. It's not a marketing purpose. It's not something that we use. It's a purpose that we use to generate cohesion internally and for people to understand what we're trying to achieve. It also comes from our founder, and it's very broad, so I'll explain how that works. The purpose to make a positive difference in the world is the very, very meta level. But at the next level, this is linked to the story I told you about Frederick. So we're looking to put smiles on millions of faces. And this we translate then in the business through fundamentally is about delighting our customers. So what we want all the people in the business to work to, the getting out of bed moment is why I'm going to work. I'm there to delight customers. What is it I'm doing every day to delight the customer? And that's the message internally. We also have 2 other elements of our purpose that I will talk about with examples. One is around building resilient communities, and you'll understand that a little more when I talk about the communities that we work in, because of course there's the UK Yorkshire community, but ultimately a lot of our products and our supply chain is in tropical parts of the world, and therefore our focus on ensuring that there is a consistent supply of tea and coffee and that the people are treated well and are operating in a way that is in line with our values is absolutely critical. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. And then the final part is around our environmental impact. And this is the thing that we really don't talk about that we should, and I'll give you examples. But fundamentally, we are working with tropical products all of the time, and the changing of the climate, the impact that the climate crisis is having there is immense. And when, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but you do have to tell some people in the world who don't believe there is a climate emergency, that our farmers growing tea and coffee are not able to grow it where they used to grow it all the time. They have to move to different heights, different places. And that is how it has a massive impact, certainly on our business, let alone on the world. And in all of this, one of the reasons, or the part we don't talk about, is this is always a mutuality, a mutual position between us and the supply chain, us and the customer. We're not doing this for any other reason than it makes sense to our business. But fundamentally, we believe that business can be, and it should be, a force for good in the world. And that principle runs through everything we do. So without that, you're just a business. I think these are the areas that we believe we can have the most impact. So as I said, not shared externally, but that's the driver for us running the business. And then we have our values. So the values called the 6 Ps. You may recognise the products that they're on. That's called All the Fond and Fancy. Anybody? I haven't got any of those, by the way. Sorry, I haven't got any of those. But they're not values in the way that I think sometimes I see other corporates with their 3-word values, integrity, excellence, whatever. These 6 Ps come from our founding family, and they're in something called our family constitution. And they're really the things that we give attention to that are absolutely important to our business. And the way they work is that everything you do in the business, you should be able to check against those values and say, is that right, in alignment with the values? So behind those words are descriptors of what we mean by that. And I'll talk through and give some examples on probably people, planet, passion to a degree. And the one in the top right corner, as you're looking, prosperity. That's really important because lots of businesses talk about how to make profit. we talk about prosperity, and there's a reason for that, because firstly, it's generational. We're a generational business, and therefore we're not looking for the short term. We invest for the long term. We have all sorts of rules around what we can and can't do, one of which is we cannot borrow money. So our prosperity and our wealth has to be generated by ourselves. Now, this can be in a business model of other businesses, you'll find that strange, but it's a strongly held principle that we fund ourselves and we generate our own investment wealth, if you like. And in doing that, we're in a position now as a business where our balance sheets are worth £160 million. So it does work. We can continue to invest with cash that's generated by ourselves. And prosperity as a principle is something where we all share. And it's not just about profit driven for shareholders, it's for all stakeholders. So that's really important. We talk about prosperity. And again, as we go through, I'll share a little bit more on that. And these values, they're not all necessarily in the same level of ascendancy at the same time. So, for example, we've gone through a period in the business where we focused on process because we needed to sort our infrastructure to invest in systems and technology. But that's sort of we've moved on from there now. And ultimately, we now have in the ascendancy planet and people, I would say. And so they're not always equal. And we report on our business internally on all 6 of those values. So we have what we call a multiple bottom line approach. So we're not just focused, as some organisations are, on the financial. We want to know how we're impacting against our measures on planet and people and process and so on. So, for example, we've got an AGM coming up in a couple of weeks. We report to the shareholders on the basis of the values. And of course, there's some numbers at the end, there's some stat accounts and things that we have to file, but our report and the presentation we'll be doing will be against the values and how we're achieving what we've set out to do. And that perpetuates. So every investment decision that someone brings in the organisation has to be clear about how it's impacting on each of the values. Sometimes people try to cram a few in and say, it's a little bit tenuous, but fundamentally it works well. So those are our values. I'm going to talk about people first. So just a couple of things from here. One is our group prosperity.
Sorry, do you have some questions during your presentation or not?
I think, given there aren't many people here, there's not going to be lots. I was going to leave you to the end. If it's something that's pertinent to the last.
Yes, I'm a lecturer in finance here at Yorkshire. I apologize for my voice. I teach a lot recently. You said that Betis doesn't finance itself with debt. And actually, I've used your financial statements during my teaching class. And the principle of financing with debt says that, we make substantial savings in tax while doing so. And also we can generate longer term profits at a higher pace. So what is your take on that in terms of building prosperity? If you don't use a leverage, you may not deliver enough growth at enough pace and therefore lag behind. So that's kind of in my head, not in line with the prosperity principle.
Yes.
So can you please elaborate a little
So there's 2 things. I'll answer one with my group hat on and one with my finance director's hat on, because they are 2 different things. So with my finance director's hat on, I'm absolutely where you are, because in terms of what you've explained, the ability to generate more and certainly more profitability, more cash actually, can be leveraged by debt. Of course it can, and that's why people use it. And depending on the return you're generating, you have to work out whether you're getting value for that investment. The other point is this is a fundamental principle of the shareholding family, and therefore I think it's quite a Yorkshire thing as well. It's about understanding the principles, and this includes investing in real estate. So there's another question. So we've got a big, without giving too much away, we've got a big potential investment project coming up. Now for me, the logic says match your investment with some debt that actually enables that investment, because it's bigger than anything that I've done for a long time. But the conversation internally is, yes, but we don't borrow. So how are we going to do that in a way that actually generates? We're still going to do it, but how are we going to do it in a way that aligns with our principles? So I get, from a purist point of view, you're absolutely over here, and I can't argue with that there is potential to leverage. The bit around the principle is not just about not borrowing. It's also about questioning whether growth is right at every point. And this is I wasn't going to get into this bit at this stage, but there is a sort of mantra in corporate world to say, we're always growing, we've got to progress. Well, is that right? So fundamentally, if you're borrowing to leverage, you're borrowing to grow and get greater return. But actually, it might be about looking at what you do in a much more efficient way. It's a question about, if you're talking, as I was, about values in relation to the planet, is growth the right thing where we're using natural resources? How do you look at the business in a different way? So there are fundamentals at the core of that, which mean it's not all about growing at any cost, which then tends to lead to your argument of when you need more leverage to actually be able to grow the business. So there's a whole masterclass on just that issue, I think, around whether it's right for a business to invest, to grow at all stages. I mean, there are other examples, if you go to a Patagonia or somewhere where they have fundamentally different principles of how they want to be seen. But I'm not trying to dress up what's at the core of this, which is a desire not to be, if you pardon the expression, in hock to the banks. And that comes from history and what's happened in the business, because there was a time when that was a problem. And therefore, it's a hard-earned lesson that said, we don't want to be in that position again. We want to generate our own wealth. So it's a very personal decision to the business, really.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting take on that.
Well, I'm more than happy to debate it more, because sometimes I'm as frustrated as you sound by that concept, because we could do more. But actually, when you look at it, we could do better, and we can do better by the way that we invest our capital. I don't think it needs to be borrowed.
It's really interesting because in class we've got students from all over the world, from countries at different stages of development. And I always try to argue that, well, in Britain, we've reached certain level of development, and therefore we can talk about things like you say, sustainable growth, not necessarily growth at all stages of life, right? But then I speak to students from China, students from Eastern Europe, who are really determined to generate growth at all costs. So it's interesting, and I will definitely use the case of the company.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's got to be the right type of growth, and one or two of our shareholders talk about degrowth. So just to finish on this one of the I didn't say before, but that's Betty's Bakery in the middle. One of the principles that we only have 5 branches, and when I joined the business, I came from a corporate finance background. And lots of my previous colleagues thought, this is where you're going. You're going for the growth. You're going to be. And so my private equity contacts were knocking on the door saying, when you need the funding, just where to come. I said, well, this is a long burn. I don't think it'd be like that. And then the Betty's part of the business, it's not only not like that. It's absolutely, we are not going to do that. We could have franchised it, grown it, put it on every street corner. We've had approaches from people who would do that. But that's not what the shareholders want. They want it to be special. They want it to be quality. They want it to delight their customers in the way that I described before. So resist all of that. Now, other people might take a completely different view. But in some ways, that's very special in today's society to see a business that's more concentrated on doing the right thing rather than necessarily the growth. So that's the principle. The other part of the business, the tea and coffee, there is more scope to do because it's international. It's got volume and quantity already, and we need to maintain that. But I'll talk a little bit more about that. So, yeah, brilliant question, and right to the number of things that I talk about, and do a bit of this every now and again. But actually, as long as we continue to progress in the way that we aim to, I think that's the right thing. I was going to talk about the Group Prosperity Scheme, which is a profit share we have in the business. So when I talk about people, the principle that we're all in it together as stakeholders. So the shareholders clearly take a dividend. And back in time, 40 years ago, there was always been demand for people to have ownership of some shares, as you would in other organisations. But we don't do that. That is held by one group of people who are the family shareholders. What they created was an ability for us to share in the profitability. of the organisation. So every year we divvy some of the profits up. So it's 25% of the group's pre-tax profits are pooled for the employees. So this last year, that was £9.5 million. And it means that every one of our employees gets a percentage of their salary, which was 14.5% additional to their pay. Now, it's not performance related, so there would be another line of questioning around, performance related. Why isn't it? Well, how does it drive difference? It's not layered, so senior execs get the same percentage. There's no other bonus scheme. We all share in the same thing. It is a percentage basis, so you get it based on your salary. So the more salary you get, the more absolute bonus you get. But fundamentally, we're all in this together. We're all driving to the same goal, and we are all rewarded for that performance in that way. And certainly when you're at an operating level, a day-to-day operating level, that's a big thing. 14% of your salary every year. It's, well, I say every year, it's not every year, it's not always that high, but somewhere around about 10% of the minimum is a big thing. And it generates that feeling of belonging and the fact that you are valued. And it's by no means the only way we do that, but it's one that's really, really tangible. And that is fundamentally what we aim to do with people in the business is, what is it that people value, and how do we, it's always about how you treat people, whether they're in your supply chain or whether they're in your office or your factory or whether they're your customers. When we talk about our people value, it applies to all of those groups. And it doesn't quite lead on now, but I was going to talk to you about our approach of looking to the future. So we have something called the future picture process, which I think is different, certainly different to anything I've experienced before in other businesses where you create a strategy and it's quite often top down or predominantly top down. So our future picture process is usually looking at a 7-year, forward 7 years. And the way we do it is we transport ourselves to that year. So in this case, it was 2030. That's the one we're working to now. And we work out, what does the business look like in 2030? What do we want it to look like? What do we think it should look like? What are the challenges that we'll have? And we work back from there to create the plan that we want to live into. And we do that, but we do that with many people in the business. So it's not a top-down led strategy. It gives the opportunity for much more input from across those involved across the group. And we've varied that. Sometimes it gets unwieldy. The first one I did was everyone could put in whatever they wanted, and it was too unwieldy. But we've now found ways of doing that, which you capture the ideas and the desires for people that people see for the business. And we're able to shape it into something that's aspirational, but it's still, when you then build back from there, it's held in some realism, because often people set out a 5 or 10-year strategy and you think, how on earth are we going to get there? Where our aim is to build that from today, but have that lodestar, if you like. And then the picture of the bakery is there because that's built on the concept of a Swiss chalet, our Swiss heritage. And you'll see outside all our sites, we aim to have what's called a site beyond compare. So that bit about people being important. When people come to work, I came to work yesterday, and our factory site has got crocuses everywhere. It's got blossom. It's got, I mean, that sounds like a Disney film now. There are birds singing. Genuinely, when visitors come to our site, they go, wow. But that's because that's what we value, and we want people to feel that they're in the right place. Now, I know in modern environments, there's huge amounts of things people have, but it's the stuff that's authentic to us and what's a core to us. So this is in terms of the great place to work. I'll talk about our supply chain on another slide because it's really important that I explain when we talk about people, it is so much more than our own people. So this is where, for me, this gets slightly interesting in terms of what we do and where we source our products from. So no big lessons in tea and coffee, but they are tropical products. They come from some of the most difficult places in the world. In terms of the green teapots, which is where we get our tea from, most of it comes from East Africa. So by far our biggest supply is Kenya. Around about 50% of our tea comes from Kenya, but increasingly Rwanda, Malawi, Tanzania, And then we have a core of Yorkshire tea that is from India. It's called from Assam in India, and it's blended. So it's never the same combination. It's always blended by specialists to get to the same flavour. But because of the seasonality, it's different product each time. The clever bit is putting it together. And then you'll see, I'm sure you know where coffee comes from. There are a few additional ones over to the far side in terms of Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. Coffee, again, seasonal, but in somewhere like Colombia, you can grow it all year round because it's grown at height. So that's where we get our products from. And we are talking about people. We are dealing with some of the major challenges that exist across global commerce, really. Just like people are in cocoa or sugar or any tropical agriculture. And it's fundamentally about poverty. It's fundamentally about human rights. And this is where we aim to make a difference. So when I talk about making a difference in the world, our engagement in terms of the supply chain, so we have direct contact. And I know lots of people in our business say this, but we actually work directly with the suppliers. We go to see them, we check their quality, we don't audit them, but we check what they're doing. We build a great relationship, but fundamentally it's so that we get the highest quality product. And we have something called the tailored sourcing approach, which is fundamental to our principles, where we pay a premium for that quality. And we don't pay it to a third party, and we don't pay it, it's not fair trade. We don't do fair trade, which I usually get questions in places like this, why aren't you fair trade? Well, fair trade is a mechanism to ensure that people get fundamentally a fair pay for their product. We're here. We're already paying significant premium to the fair trade floor. We don't need fair trade. And we do that, firstly, in a way that gets the quality, but secondly, we then invest. When I was talking about the resilient community, we invest in that community. So last year, our investment program supports an investment program outside of the normal sourcing of product. We spent £1.5 million overseas and £500,000 in the UK in terms of cost. And what that does, for example, is it creates projects that actually deliver something locally. So the challenges we've had are things like on an agricultural basis, it's the fact that people chop down trees for wood. They don't regrow trees. There are no other cash crops compared to tea, for example. So they're very dependent on a particular product. What we've been doing is investing in farm schools, investing in trees, fundamentally getting people to plant different types of trees that enables them to have a cash crop, say like avocados alongside the tea. And there are many, many projects, often done with NGOs and third parties as well. In terms of, just get some water, excuse me.
I know we need to limit the questions during the process. Just out of interest, where does the power balance lie with your suppliers? They want you or you want them? As in, are you competing for suppliers or the other way around?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have very long relationships with our suppliers. And when you go out to see them, so I've been out to Rwanda recently, I'm going to Assam in a few weeks. They welcome you and it's really difficult this, because you are welcomed as people who care and people who make a difference, and therefore you are valued. But the reality is, when you go to some of the places, our take of the supply is this. So, if you go to India, 98% of what's produced is either internal market for markets that don't come anywhere near the UK, which have different standards and have different, whether that's on pesticides or whether that's on labour standards or whatever it might be. So the ability to have influence outside of that local supply chain is there, but it's not as big as you might think. So in Rwanda, for example, we take 10 or 12% of the whole of the tea of Rwanda for Yorkshire Tea. And therefore that gets you a place at the table with government. So when we go there, we meet the agriculture minister, we meet people who have real influence, and we can affect some change. So we are wanted, but to your question, we are very selective. And this is one of the points I was going to talk about, that we have problems in these areas, as everyone does. So we've had an instance recently in Malawi with gender-based violence, and it is often in our environment, there are often a lot of women doing the hard graft in these countries, and they're not empowered. And ultimately, the efforts that have been made to try and change that also lead to some resentment and the violence that exists. And in one of the places in Malawi that we use, this was exposed internationally. Now, none of us are naive enough to say that this doesn't go on and you just don't see it all the time, you don't find it. But in this instance, on a particular tea estate, there was some pretty horrible stuff going on, and we were using that tea estate, as were, and I won't name them, but 3 or 4 of our major competitors. And what the competitors did was they all left. They all said, that's it, done, we're not using you anymore, it's been in the papers, it's been in the press, we're off. And we said, hang on a minute, we've been here all the time, and this has been happening. It's our responsibility to work with you to sort it out, to see what we can do. Working with NGOs, because some of the issues are endemic to the country as well, but ultimately, what can we do? And we set out a charter that said, if you do this, then we stay. Because the worst thing we can do is take away the money and the wealth from people who need it, I think. This is a minefield, and therefore we stay, we work on some fundamental principles and say, if you fulfill this, we continue working with you. If you don't, now that we are aware of what's happening, we change, And as it happens, we've been able to see the progress that's enabled us to stay. And of course, what happens? Competitors come back knocking on the door saying, oh, right, okay, things are better than they were. Perhaps we should be associated with you before. That's not how we work, We have partnerships, and partnerships go wrong, and you're there to work on them. So challenges and the work that we do both at the trading level to ensure that the money flows to the right places and the right level of premium, the quality comes back to us, and we are able to support the communities in which we work with other alongside expertise, skill, finance, support. That's how we work, and that's fundamental to our values. Now moving on to planetary stuff, which I've sort of touched on there as well. I mean, we talk about our planet value, and this also links to my theme of, as a business, you need to be authentic in whatever you do. You can't just make up the causes that you stand for. I don't believe that many bandwagons have been jumped on or greenwashing over recent times. So our story is that little picture in the middle around trees. So one of our shareholders, who was our chief executive for many years, Jonathan Weil, he came home from work one day, and his 2 children had been watching Blue Peter, and they were very upset. And they were upset because the program was about deforestation of the Amazon and the impact it was having on wildlife was their particular aim. And they said to him, this is in the 80s, they said to him, what are we going to do about it? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, well, could we plant some trees? And he said, well, yeah, you could plant some trees. So the agreement was, if you plant 1 tree for the children, then I will, through the business, plant 999,999, and together we'll do 1 million trees. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is that was before tree planting was a thing. And many, many businesses plant trees now. Question, is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? Is it having the right impact? But for us, this is authentic. This is at the core of who we are. And therefore, we're following our principles and our values, and we continue to plant trees. It's not the biggest thing. It's not the only thing we do. But over time, it's been 7 million, not 1 million. And that's something that we're very proud of, and it has a real link. And as I was telling you before, when you look at what we do overseas, that has a massive impact, whether it's, trees can have so much positivity. I talked about the commercial crop, I talked about the use of fast-growing trees for firewood, but for shade, for community, for a place, they're all reasons for planting trees, and we've done that over the years. And as I say, we constantly have questions now, is that the right thing? Because there are so many other elements of carbon reduction that we can do, but we hold that as core and important to ourselves. So I just wanted, again, this is the bit about where we hide our lights under a bushel thing that people said to me previously, the stuff that we do. And this goes back to 2021. We got a UN Climate Award at COP26. And the other recipients of the award were people like Microsoft and the city of Paris and the city of Guadalajara for major initiatives that they've done. And us, little old Beckers and Taylors from Harrogate. And at the time, and again, recognising things have moved on since. This was because we were able to certify our products and our business as carbon neutral. And the reason I say things have moved on, but the neutrality for us was important because it wasn't bought in carbon credits that set offset. It was the projects that we do in our communities overseas. So, for example, on the far side of the picture, the major project to remove wood-burning, polluting wood-burning fuel stoves in Malawi, in the communities that we work in, to use bioproduct to change the way that things operate there. And that is our offset project. And there are many of those, but they are real, they're ours, they're things that we invest in locally. They're not random projects where when you fly on a plane, you pay 10 quid to someone else to plant a tree or whatever. So this was really important to us because we make every effort to reduce the carbon we put out, but then clearly at the moment that's not possible to be a 0 point. So we invest in these projects to offset. Oh, this is passion.
Brothers, sisters, today a great legacy rests upon your shoulders. Because here we make more than just tea. We make proper brews. Brews that bring a tear to your eye and warmth to your soul. So go out there and do it for each other. Do it for yourselves, but most of all, do it for Yorkshire! Oh, and the fire drill's Thursday at 3.
Yorkshire Tea, where everything's done proper.
So I showed that because people always say, well, you always talk about passion as one of the P's, and it's like, what's that about? It's like, well, that's our advert, and that engenders a passion about who we are. I know it's a bit of fun, and all our adverts are a bit of fun, that's the principle. That's what we're trying to do. We talk about a proper brew for Yorkshire Tea, and in that one, that's our induction. The principle, that's what it's like every day working for Yorkshire Tea. That's the amount of passion you get. But in there, most of the people that in the audience are our people. So when we do our adverts, that's one of the things that we like to do. We like to make sure that talking around our principles and our values of people, they're involved. They volunteer. There's a casting session. They volunteer. Some don't make it. It has to be said. Not applied yet, but it's great. It's part of the fun of working for us. I just thought as a little bit of fun, I'd show you that. Okay, so moving on. I mean, there's lots more I could talk about around all of those things. I'm sure it'll come up in questions, but I did say we'll talk about our leadership model, and that probably is the thing that increasingly I get asked to talk about more because it's different. So we have shareholders, and as I said, there are 8 shareholders who are descended from the founder. They, between them, the generations, very broadly, the 3rd generation own 50%. There are 3 of them, and the 4th generation own between them, 5 of them, the other 50%. That's how it works. It's very small for a family business to have in their 4th generation only 5. It's usually a pyramid like this, and it gets bigger and bigger, as we're now seeing with our 5th, where there are already 8 in that generation. These people on the left, as you look, are the 4th generation family council. So what we have is I think I mentioned it before, we have a family constitution, which is the core of how we're guided from a governance point of view, from which our values and purpose come, and some of the rules around borrowing, things like that I touched on. And then none of these people are active in the business. We don't have any shareholders in the business. And this is important for when I talk about how we've evolved into a collaborative CEO model. So going back in time, I mentioned a guy called Jonathan Wild. He was CEO and chair for 30, 40 years. And the business ran as a private business that the owners were at the top of and run it in that way. Now, since 2020, there's not been a member of the family actually in the business and on the board. And there's only one before that who was a non-exec chair of the business for 10 years, Jonathan's wife, Leslie. These people are the shareholders, and we meet with them regularly. They have their own family council, and they put ideas into the future picture, as I mentioned before, about what they look for. But ultimately, it's now, and they get upset when I say this, it's now a professionally run business, as in people who are professionals, not owners of the business. Then we have a board, which is our governance board, predominantly built around non-execs. There's 2 execs, myself and one of Andy, who you'll see on another slide. The others are non-execs from a varied background in terms of business and in life. And they're there, obviously, as non-execs are, appointed by the shareholders to ensure the governance of the business. So that bit is pretty much like other organisations. The second bullet on there, yeah.
Sorry, again, finance question. So given that we've got the shareholders who are not involved in the business, what do you justify by the share repurchases that you have done?
How do I justify the share repurchase?
repurchases? So is it for someone retired or something? How?
Yeah, so there isn't, so in terms of our business, there isn't an external market for the shares, as you will know. So one of the shareholders, which you'll have picked up from the accounts, decided to sell some shares, so their own volition, to raise some funds for themselves. So that was a very specific thing where we have a mechanism that says those shares can be bought by other members of the shareholding body first and foremost, and that happened to a degree, and then the remainder are offered back to the company. And if the company has the funds and wants to buy those, then they are able to do so. So we chose to do that. Obviously, it reduces the shareholding base, which has an impact on dividend and returns, but also it's quite a difficult conversation where you have a shareholder who wants to gradually remove themselves from the business. You don't really want that sitting in your shareholder body. There's a reason that's way beyond the financial for doing that as well. So that's the story. That's what we've done, and we've done it over the last. Well, you haven't seen the next accounts, but it'll be in the next accounts as well. Is that what you meant?
Yes, thank you.
And that's the first. I mean, that's not happened. So, history of the business. In 1996, there was a similar event, and from that, lots of the constitution and lots of other things were created because no one had anticipated it in 1996. Roll forward to 2023, we were ready for this moment and we were much more prepared. And from a person in the business, running the business, these are issues that you don't want to take you away from all the other stuff that you do, because it can be very distracting, and therefore we have a mechanism to deal with that. So that's what we've done. So yes, so what I was going back to the no family in the business, no family on the board, and that's not a never. It's just it's not right at this point in time. And in family businesses, it becomes increasingly difficult often for people who are to continue to do what a founder did, who was calling all the shots, or even the second generation who've seen what the founder did and pick it up and run with it in a different way. It often gets diluted, and therefore the decision was we don't think we've got people who either want to or actually can run the business, and therefore we're going to make some different choices. So when I joined the business, we had up until that point, it had been family leadership all the way through. And there was a recognition, this is quite a key point, a recognition that the way the business had been run was very much owner, manager, leader, top down, decisions made by people who own the shares. And the recognition was, well, that can't continue. If we haven't got any of these people coming on the board or online, we need to ensure that people in the business are able to make those calls for themselves. And it sounds really simplistic and quite patronising, really, but those in the business have just been used to taking the owner's view and running with it. And this was a whole period of investment from our business into individuals in the organisation to develop their own leadership and their own strategic thinking, which has been over 10, 15 years. We've continued to do that. And it's been critically important for when I talk about a future picture to 2030. That didn't really exist. That concept of longer term strategy just didn't exist before. And it was very much, well, we've got an idea, we'll do this. And of course, there's a place for that. But when you're not the owner of the business, it takes on a different guise. So that's where I get to the point about distributed leadership. The principle, I think it's on the next slide. I mean, again, not trying to teach you to suck eggs, but a very simple principle that decisions should be made at the point where it makes the significant difference. And the explanation's there, where the key expertise is. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's a really big change when you've been in an organisation where other people made decisions and told you what to do. And therefore, the investment in that and significant time, people learning, studying, external influence from third parties who are bringing the ideas to help us here, to get to a point where you understand what your frame of reference is, you know what your authorities are, and you've got boundaries that are helpful because they actually frame where your authority is, and people can make decisions at a different level. So this is the principle that we run the business by. Now, it really doesn't always work. You know, it's great. I would be pretending if I said it was just, we've got to that and it all works. Because when you do this, you also have to collaborate. You also have to work with people, and you often have to work, as you do the collaborative CEO, across functions, across businesses, rather than in your traditional silo. And therefore this becomes more complex. And if you haven't set it up right, people get to a point of, whose decision is it? Is it my decision? Can I make this decision? And we find that quite a lot. And the corollary to that is, I don't make a decision because I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe to make that decision. So the thing continues, whatever that thing might be. And that's dangerous. And if you see that, that has to ultimately have to stop that happening. So there is a shadow side of this as well, you know, but that's the aim, where decisions are made at the right level across the organisation. And then that leads me to the collaborative leadership model. So the way it works, or the way it's structured, is there are 4 of us. We each have our own functional specialism. So we are still responsible for a functional area. But going back to the time, as I said, when Jonathan retired as CEO, they at that point appointed the first non-family CEO. So there's a story here which leads into why this works for us. So the appointment of the non-family CEO, who had a background in family businesses, had worked for Cadbury, had worked for Dutchy Originals, had worked for all sorts of worthy and strong family businesses, was recruited. And he lasted 4 months. So big investment, big player, very clear from the family of what the parameters were to start working with. He felt that there was a different opportunity, I suppose, akin to what you were saying before. And I was trying to explain why Betty's is kept at a size that's special. Well, actually, the first thing you come in as I'm here to lead the business is, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? We could be doing that. That wasn't what was wanted. So that led to a rethink. And the rethink was, as a privately owned business, where there are no family in direct control, what do we need to feel that our business has been taken in the right direction, but in a way that we want? And how do we ensure that there's not individual power in one person that could actually have that impact? So that was the foundations of the collaborative leadership model. So it became, over time, we weren't the collaborative CEO at the point, we were a group executive team, was that we don't want to have a single CEO, but we don't know how we develop something different. So we'll literally try a different model. And that different model was to have each of us with our 4 areas of business, but across the top, a layer which we took the responsibilities of a CEO. Increasingly over time, that layer has got bigger and our functional remits have got smaller. So we've been able to divest of some of that and begin to focus on the bigger picture. When I talked about the development of the strategy, some of the bigger decisions, they sit very much in that CEO layer. The principles of why you do that, as well as the one I've described, is that some of them are obvious. You come at this with a broader perspective. You come at it with a different set of skills. You find there's a natural succession. You did have a 5th member at one point. That didn't work. It's a very difficult model to get into if you've not worked in this way before. And the 4 of us have worked together for quite a while now, which really, really helps. We spread the risk of one failure or one person leaving the business. But the key thing I always get asked is, well, how the hell do you make decisions when there are 4 of you? CEOs just make a decision. It's like, well, no, they don't. CEOs, good CEOs, in my opinion, they canvass opinion, they look for opinion, they look for input from elsewhere, and then they make a decision. That word propositional is really key. So I think people have this perspective that we sit in a room and think things up and then just talk about it amongst ourselves and go with it. But usually what we're doing is putting forward a proposition for a challenge in the business. and one of us will bring a proposition. You can't all just sit there and make it up. You have to start with something. And believe me, it took us a while to work this out because we did do a bit of, what do you think? What do you think? So whatever the issue is, and it might not be us, it might be someone else brings that proposition, but it's a starting point. And then what you find is you build on it. And the principle is that as a leadership model, you develop it into something that is better than the starting point. We have been running this model for 7 or 8 years now. It is subject to regular review by the board as to really, is this working? And there are lots of bits that don't necessarily work, and I'll talk about some of those on the next slide. There is also evidence, and I'm careful of the audience I'm talking to here, of research into co-led organisations and the fact that they are able to generate better returns. The population is so small in terms of those reviews, particularly with a 4-strong leadership team. In fact, the research into a 4-strong doesn't actually exist. We are, as far as we can see, we've not met others like that. But there is more of a prevalence of co-CEO or joint CEO in terms of people running an organisation. And there is some evidence to say that that actually delivers more. So this is us, this is the 4 of us. And this is about how it really works, or when it does and when it doesn't. So the point I was talking about being propositional, you also, people think it's a vote. We need everyone to vote and then we'll get consensus. Well, it doesn't work like that. We've had one in 8 years, or whatever, we've had one topic where it was literally, well, how else are we going to resolve this? Is it a vote? But there are 4 of us. So if it's 2-2, where does that go? And of course, we have an escalation route to the board if we really needed to, but very rarely used. It is collaboration. What I mean by that is, I don't have to agree in the discussion with the others. So if I've got a particular point, I bring my point, we debate it. I have to put it forward as strenuously as I can. But at the end of the day, if the other 3 don't agree with me, it's a point that I hold. I can, as we call it, play a token. There is the ultimate veto to say, I'm so not with this, I'm playing my token. Never done that. No one's ever done that. Because what we do is, we get to a decision, and unless it cuts across my personal principles, which I don't see how it would, because that would be against the ethos of the business. If it was cutting across my personal principles, that would be my veto, I think. Never had to do that. So, but I can walk out of the room not agreeing with the route we've taken, having put as much influence as I can into it. But when I walk out of the room, I have to have cabinet responsibility. Just, I'm sure you hear this in lots of places, because the thing that often sinks us or impacts us, if we have a slightly different version of events across the 4 of us when we go out into the business, it has to be cabinet responsibility, and it has to be the message that we give is consistent, because it only takes a small space between us and someone's through it saying, well, I'm not sure that's right, because so that is hard learned and hard earned, that position. And the camaraderie, not cozy. Yeah, we're good. We're not friends, but we get on really well. I say we're not friends. I don't say that to my other colleagues, but we get on really well. We've just been on a residential in London for 2 days. Fantastic, a lot of good work, but also enjoyed ourselves. But if you get cozy, then you lose your edge and you're not able to challenge. And that's the other factor. We've built a degree of safety in the way that we work, that everything's on the table, everything can be said. And it can't be that you step back from that. We have to do that challenge. And that's a large part of what we were talking about over the last, we were away last week. Have we lost our edge? Do we accept things too easily amongst ourselves? Do we go with things for too long? Whereas if we go back to the start of this experiment, if you like, did we have a different approach? Were we harder edge? Were we cutting through? And have we got used to each other too much? And how, if that's the case, how are we going to generate that dynamism that needs to continue? And there is an element of, we had the conversation about, we have been blunted in some of our approaches, because we can all see reason in what the other one's saying, but actually you still have to be able to challenge that and say, well, that might be reasonable, but look, we've been trying this for this long. We need to be going in that direction. And if you lose that, you know, it's part of the review. You have to go back to those fundamental principles. So that's the challenge point. And then the credibility bit, it's really hard for people, certainly externally and definitely in the business, to get the concept of a collaborative CEO. You know, when I go out and talk about it, it's fine talking in this world, but when I'm out representing the business, you know, I don't say I'm CEO, I say I'm joint CEO or collaborative CEO. And it's a very different model, and we all represent ourselves in different areas. So we've got 4 people who can go out and talk about the business as CEO. And that takes externally quite a lot of getting your head around. But internally, it is very difficult because we all have our functional roles as well. So we need to be seen at times as the CEO and at times in your functional role. So it is slightly schizophrenic in your, you know, your hat wearing, as we call it. You know, you put your hat on, as I did before. You know, today I'm Group Finance Director, today I'm CEO. And there's no today I am, it's a continuum. But ultimately you have to navigate that. So people internally get a consistent message for the business around from the CEO, even though that's 4 people. So yeah, we all look like we're having a good time there, but frankly, you know, clearly we fight like cat and dog most of the time. You know. So that is broadly where I was getting to. These are the some points, and then I've got a little video at the end just to, if you'll indulge me. But these are the things I think are really important. We talked about authenticity. You know, we are a business who have got great brands. If you take Yorkshire Tea, you know, you look at what we've done with that brand. It's because I believe that we invest in quality and we don't take ourselves too seriously. That advert I showed you, it's about having a bit of fun. And the customer likes that, the customer engages with that. All that stuff we do at Origin and all the good stuff we do, we don't bother telling them about that really, because we know that's important and it's part of who we are. But actually it's very difficult to share that in an authentic way where people don't think you are, you know, as is the phrase, greenwashing. Or so be authentic, follow your heart, follow your soul of the business. Tell your story. The purpose, well, I don't know that our purpose is a purpose that you would recognise in the sense that it's not externally facing, but internally, the concept of delighting customers, hold that in your mind. That's what we're all here for. It's simple and very accessible to everyone. It doesn't matter what you do in the organisation. And you can even think of it as your own internal customer if you want to, but fundamentally, you mean the external customer. I think probably the biggest thing for me is the values. Everyone in the business knows we have the 6 Ps. They can't rhyme them off and say what they all stand for and all of that, you know, and why would you want them to? But there is a frame of reference that says, when I'm doing something, I need to make sure that it checks in with the values. And it becomes a natural thing rather than you know, here's my checklist of values, am I okay? People will pull me up and say, well, how does that fit with whichever particular value? And I'll think, yeah, you're probably right. Is that it? You know, something that we need to talk about. And then leadership. I've explained a model that's slightly different, but it's slightly different because we're slightly different. It wouldn't fit everyone. You know, part of the reason it works is it's because it's in a private family business where there is no desire to have a single person making the decisions. I can't pretend it wasn't driven out of that because it was. But then we found a model that we think is different and works for the reasons that I've explained. Be brave, have a go at things. You know, there is not, I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted here, there is not one style of leadership. There are not 5 styles of leadership. There are many levels of situational leadership for an individual. And if you look at an organisation, then you can have a leadership model that suits you, and that's what we've aimed to do. But you've got to be brave, because early on, it was really hard. In fact, it was almost too hard to try and do this for the reasons I've said. And therefore, stick with it. Make sure you're able to see it through. Questions?
Yes. Thank you very much.
You.
So, Bob, please.
Yeah, that's great to share.
That's okay.
Thanks, Paul, for coming along and sharing that kind of collaborative leadership model. And I must say congratulations on your performance in tea, because tea is a very habitual purchase. So to actually get to 40%, it's kind of amazing. My question is about coffee. In fact, it's obviously it's quite well documented in the press about the escalating coffee price. how will you manage that as a business?
Yeah, so I mean, coffee is as you've alluded to, it's at the highest ever level it's been in terms of price per kilo. Which and the reasons for that predominantly are because of weather conditions that are driving things like droughts in Brazil, which reduces the level of crop. So the higher the price is because fundamentally there aren't the beans available for everyone who wants them. So you're going to see wherever you buy your coffee over coming months, you're going to see prices going up, whether that's Starbucks or whether that's us. And this is a position that we've had to tackle in more than one way. I mean, what we did last year, and this wasn't particularly related to the current pricing, but it was on an upward trend, is we actually reduced the weight of coffee in our bags. So we went from an old-fashioned 227 grams to 200 grams, which is in keeping with many of our competitors. That was massive for us because of the whole shrinkflation thing. I mean, I personally, this is one of the conversations where I didn't think it was necessarily the right thing to do, but I was proven wrong because we've done it and it hasn't impacted sales in the way that we thought it would. So that was one step. The other is around pricing. And so I talked about to the consumer. So I talked about our own label with M&S and Waitrose. There's a simple contract arrangement that if the price of coffee goes up, in terms of the world, then it passes through to them because that's the contractual arrangement. The bit that's more difficult is our own brand, in terms of the Harrogate brand, because there is no agreement, and therefore our sales are predominantly through the supermarkets, the monthly supermarket. So you then go into bat with them over a price increase, and that's the process we're in at the moment. The slight positive is that there's every amount of evidence of why you'd be putting the price up. It's not just if you were doing it on the basis of, well, national insurance is going up and employment costs. So this is the cost of the raw material, which is now everyone is paying a different price. So there is a basis for that. Similarly, we look at the tea price. We haven't put a Yorkshire Tea price increase to supermarkets for 3 or 4 years. We've focused on our own cost base and tried to make it more competitive. So, but you can only go so far, and coffee's the example at the moment. It's everyone is putting prices up. We will be no different. We'll go from a mechanism. We used to those bags used to be not that long ago 2 for £6 was the offer. It'll now be 2 for £8. That's the changing world we're in, I'm afraid. It's down to climate, but it's not just we're not just saying this. We're saying the weather patterns that go on now, the variations that you see. The frost in places that you didn't. So people talk about global warming. It's not just warming; it's the weather pattern. Whether it's El Nino or whatever it might be. Ultimately, the impact on areas such as in Brazil, it produces 50% of the world's coffee, and therefore you have a frost. I was there a few years ago now, where they were checking because there'd been a frost overnight, and the farmers we were with were panic-stricken about the impact it would have on their crop because they weren't expecting that. It didn't used to happen, and it does now. And so things like that. And then you get into, and on the slide, they're flooding in different parts of the world, and that impacts probably more tea than coffee, but it's an issue. It is our biggest issue longer term. So when I talk about 2030, we've got plans to 2050 that focused on commodities. It's not just about 2030, but most people can't get their head around it thinking to 2050. Thank you.
Sorry, can I get a question from the online audience? So we have a committed online audience as well. Alex, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Hi there. Hi, Paul. It's Alex here.
Alex.
Hiya. I'm actually a York lad myself, and I've been a fan of the Fat Rascal for a long time, to be honest. Really, really enjoyable talk. I'm interested in the way that the company interacts with the local business community in York and North Yorkshire to kind of, my question is, how important is a company like yours in pushing the agenda of purpose and meaning, maybe in business in the local area? And if so, what do you do around this?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question because I think I said at the start about people thinking we were fairly secretive and not pushing that agenda, if I'm honest. And it's not just about, I know you're asking about purpose, but it also relates to all sorts of other things in the local community, which might be more about politics, or it might be for us things like high street footfall. what are we there to do? You know, are we there to promote that? And ultimately, I think why I'm standing here today is that, yeah, we will be. I don't think we have been. I think that's probably what you're picking up. So when I go and talk to other businesses, often the challenge is because we're relatively big for this world, there's so much we could do and so much we could get involved in. And I think I'm more at the point, which I think you were alluding to, which is about influencing rather than doing.
Yeah.
But the minute you get involved in, I mean, this is just me speaking from experience, slightly painful experience. The minute we as betters and tailors step up to be involved in something, there is a feeling that we should be leading it, and that's not where we are. You know, even overseas, you know, we're working with NGOs, we're working with other bodies to get, because our influence, as I was describing on the tea estate, is really small compared to the world. It's here, but we want to do that predominantly through enabling our people. We've got 1,600 people. How do they engage in the community that we're in? How do they lead in community and charity issues? How do we enable them to do that? That's a large part of what we're looking at. But your point about purpose and business being a force for good, I think is, for me, is increasingly important in today's world. And therefore, that's the bit I think we need to make that step on. It's not doing necessarily, it's actually leading in that sense. That's my personal view.
I think, you know, an influential company like yourselves, and it maybe doesn't need to be leading, but other companies that are around are seeing what you're doing and are learning from it, maybe, you know, and I think that has real value, and I think there's lots can be learned from your company, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the bit about we've got to get our heads into the fact that we need to talk about it more and be proud of it rather than thinking it's something we do and we'll get caught out by people who say, well, yeah, you do that, but you don't do that. Because that does tend to be some of the thought process.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Just coming back to your supply chain, I'm just wondering whether you've got any problems with coffee farmers and the aging of coffee farmers.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you work with that.
I mean, it's coffee and tea, you know. I mean, it's this when I talk about resilient communities, and one of the core challenges, both home and abroad, is about aging population. And I think the point you go into is people just don't want to work in these industries anymore, you know. And it's not just our industry. So we look at things like, I mean, in all sorts of areas. So tea in Kenya would be similar to coffee in that. There are lots of smallholders who grow either tea or coffee, and there is the historical tradition of passing your small holding on down to the generations. But if you've got 8 kids and you are passing on a relatively small piece of agricultural land that needs to be divided into 8, and 4 of them want to work in IT in the city, and 3 of them want to do something else, and 1 of them might want to do a bit of land, that's a complex issue that is a generational issue and a cultural issue, and one that we've come across. It's not always quite the same in coffee because there is definitely aging, but we invest in cooperatives where there's a family feel to them, but ultimately the principle is that there's a line here, bring through family members to work on that cooperative. The line being, they can't be children. So as I was saying that, we have had issues where you talk about family and wanting younger people in the coffee or tea supply chain, but that in some cultures means I bring my kids to work and they're working on the farm or the plantation, which clearly we can't be part of. But it is about investing in people locally to understand how agriculture can be different and how it can certainly be more greater yields and less hard work, but it's a really difficult thing because, you know, however you look at it, people don't want to be doing it. It's the same as in this country. It's the same issue as farming in this country. And people don't want to do it. It's not the thing it was. There's not a huge amount of money in it, and ultimately, it's very hard work. So there's no magic answer. What we try to build is the whole community piece around it, so that we're investing in the whole, and people understand that they've got an outlet for their product that is guaranteed at a guaranteed price, and it's not going to be subject to the fluctuations and the vagaries of the market, which is another reason why people leave, because this year I can make loads of money, but next year I've got to go and work for someone else because I can't make money on my own farm. You know, so try to keep that constant with the investment we put in.
Or people might switch crops, like what you might have in Colombia, where farmers grow coca instead.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the sort of extreme, and it happens all over the world that, you know, whether it's tea or coffee, people rip up tea bushes because they want to plant something else. And that's years of investment that's gone into that to be replaced, you know, by mangoes, guavas, whatever it is, you know, cocoa's slightly a different issue. Yeah.
We had a comment online from Bob, who is also connected with the camera now, where he kind of agreed with the mantra around growth, right? Is growth good always? May I follow up on this? I think you talk a lot about people, and you implicitly refer to culture, right? You eat it for breakfast with tea or coffee, right, or cookies. But I wonder, for me, it's interesting that you say purpose. It's not for marketing, it's for us, it's to kind of empower as well, right, the employees. So what are the tensions there? Because it looks like even internally, people don't understand that the idea of distributed leadership, the idea that, you know, you have different pillars that lead the organization. So what are the tensions there, and how do you navigate them? Because in a way, you do have a network of, you know, partnerships to also.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the things that I didn't mention is how we are structured. So we call ourselves a group, but we are fundamentally two trading businesses. And when I say trading businesses, as you'll know from the accounts, we are one business, one corporate entity, but we have two identities embedded and entailed. So when you say what are the tensions, there are sometimes tensions across that divide, because one thing that we say at a group level doesn't necessarily fit both of the businesses in relation to, when I talk about customer, we can all get the delight customer, but at the things that go below that, they might not be applicable to a Betty's customer and a Tearooms customer. So there can be tensions there. I think the distributed leadership point is, this is quite difficult, but you can find that people hide behind the reason I can't do that thing is because it's not clear of whether I've got the authority. And the principle is find out, take the authority. You say, you know, you need that authority, not sit there going, I can't do anything because I'm not quite clear whose responsibility it is. That's not what distributed leadership is about. It's not keep going with the decisions here until you get to a point where you're not sure and stop. Now, that is a tension. It is. So what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to get that authority? And I think that's something that we found relatively early on, that, you know, the message was, well, I can make my own decisions, but only if I've got full understanding of the position. Well, no, you've got to then find out more. You know, that's how you make those decisions. So the tension there. Is that the sort of thing you mean? Yeah. I mean, there are lots of, I talk about the theory, that's why I put the reality in the collaborative CEO. There are lots of tensions, and in the sense that not insurmountable tensions, but, you know, just because we've got different priorities with our functional roles as well, that can lead you, as much as that brings a breadth of knowledge and difference, it can bring a particular perspective that then needs to be broadened out.
I guess I can see why from the bottom it can look foggy, right? And why people struggle to understand it, to absorb it, to live with it. But maybe the fact that they don't understand it helps them just move on, and then it actually helps you to go ahead with it.
I think the longer we go, the more there are examples that we can show of how things work, but the fog is definitely there. But I think the biggest thing for that, I mentioned it earlier, is if there's any difference in the message from the leadership, it's the same as if you've got a single CEO and 1 week they say this and then the next week they've moved over there. How do you understand what the real direction is? I think our issue is slightly different, is it just takes one of us to make a comment publicly about something that perhaps is slightly outside of what we've either agreed or our understanding, not from malice or anything else, just an interpretation. That can have a major effect, or people allow it to have a major effect and use it to that effect. Yeah.
Please.
That's all. In thinking about recruitment and future skills that our employees might need, or potentially early careers as well, I just wondered if you could touch on any priorities that you might have from a sort of outreach to the local community perspective, whether that be in social mobility or schools or just training in general for future skills.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole raft of stuff I haven't talked about there, which, you know, when you say that, I'm thinking, oh, I've missed so much out of things we do. But the recognition, you know, fundamentally, this mutuality point that I was talking about is that we need employees, we need people, and they're increasingly not coming from the traditional routes that we would have seen. And we find that if you say social mobility is probably the biggest challenge, and the lack of educational qualifications has previously been the biggest barrier. And these are areas where we're trying new approaches with, we can call it barrierless recruitment, which is a bit like ban the box but we have, we don't need people to fill in the forms that traditionally they would have done to actually get through the door, because there's however you look at it, there's a level of bias against that. We're doing a lot of work with Teach First and working in schools. So we have school groups who come into the organisation, and I'm out of date by some chalk, but the lack of recognition of what types of job are available in an organisation that could be applicable to someone of that age. And it can be something practical. Of course, we have bakers and we have chocolatiers, and everybody gets excited by the Willy Wonka bit in the bakery when they see all the chocolate. But the fact that we need social media people, we need influencers, we need people who work with data, we need all sorts of people. When we get young people coming in for these sessions, they don't know any of this, they don't see any of this. So to be able to go out into those communities, into schools, and then we do lots of work with groups that we're increasingly at the beginnings of work with prisons, as many people are, looking at sources of employment there. Our community work that we do, I didn't mention the Cogan exchange, which came up on the screen. That's our sort of community, and we call it our community scrap store, but it's a volunteering organisation where we have 50 or 60 volunteers who come into the business to work with scrap that we produce and other businesses produce to create things that are creative, that are reusable, recyclable. But that also provides a space for people who aren't able to work in the mainstream to come and work. So we work with disability organisations to bring people in there. I could go on, there's loads of stuff. But the fundamental point again is we know that we cannot attract people in the way that we used to attract people into the types of jobs that we want. And we have to look for providing opportunity for those that don't get it elsewhere. Otherwise, we won't survive.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
The last one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Great. Sort of mid-career type skills that you're finding it hard to improve, and whether you've got any comment on, I'll put it late career, but are you losing people because they don't want to work anymore?
So there's two or three things in there. So yes, we are. So post-pandemic, people wanting to work the difficult stuff, if I'm honest. So, it doesn't sound difficult working Betty's, but evenings. One of the reasons people work in Betty's is because some of the Betty's branches are only open during the day. But York and Harrogate traditionally have been open in the evenings. We stopped that in the pandemic. We're going back to that. People don't want to work it. So you then have to get into different types of flexibility, twilight shifts, find a population who does want to work that. We have a lot of students working in the organisation. They're perhaps more interested in finding something that works, working for a period and for the money. So there's all of that side of things. But then we've started, to your sort of late career point, the apprenticeships we do, we've increased those, but we're focusing on late career apprentices as well. So effectively a change of job, change of skill set. And that's, I used to work in an organisation where we had an apprentice school and everyone was 16 and 17, and now our apprentices are like 53. And not all of them, but, and that is about finding where the people are who want to do this and matching it with the concept of apprenticeship and funding that comes through the levy and creating something that attracts different type of people. Lots of them are internal as well. So they're actually changing their career to give them the opportunity to change. So that's something that's happened over the last year or two, I'd say. So addressing it in different ways, but definitely you've got that, and flexibility is the other thing, because as you get older, as people get older, yes, they want to work. Lots more people want to work than they used to do, but they don't want to work the full range, and therefore finding those flexible routes for people. There's the thing about everyone's talking about flexibility, about working from home. No, it isn't about working from home. I get that it's an aspect of it, but when you've got a factory, a bakery, and some people who need to be face to face with the customer, they can't work from home. but they can have flexibility. And we have to find the most flexible ways that they can work in the model for the mutuality point, because we need them and they need us.
Yes, it's okay. Thank you very much. I just don't know whether the room is booked afterwards.
Oh,
So really a big thank you to the audience online and on campus, even though it might look small, it's actually quite substantial. So thank you for this talk, very interesting talk. Thanks to the online audience as well.